Let's talk personality disorders. So generally speaking, with personality disorders, you're going to see some sort of inner experience or some sort of marked behavior that results in abnormal cognition, affect, meaning the way that we are experiencing and expressing emotions, interpersonal functioning, and or impulse control. This pattern is inflexible and it exists across situations. So this is not unique to just work or school or home or a certain relationship. This is consistent across, and it happens in consistent increments. There's marked distress and impairment across dimensions, and this unstable pattern typically shows up somewhere in early to late adolescence or even early adulthood with certain disorders. So we may not see these things until someone is 17, 18, 19, even 22 or 23 years old. And these are really centered on what's called personality traits, often seeing a connection between trauma, abuse, some sort of issue in environment during development, and attachment-related issues. So a lot of comorbidity with things like substance use disorder. So with personality disorders, we see these clustered into three specific areas. We see cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. And so let's dig into cluster A with paranoid, schizoid, and schizotypal personality disorders. So paranoid personality disorder is pervasive mistrust and suspicion of others and assuming malicious intent. So others are going to hurt you, harm you, kill you, steal your stuff, poison you, really intense stuff. This typically starts in early adulthood, and we see indicators of 4 or more of these symptoms listed here. So there's no basis to suggest that others are exploiting, harming, or deceiving that person, but they strongly believe it anyway. And that individual is preoccupied with these doubts about loyalty or trustworthiness. I can't trust anyone, and I don't, again, have any sort of justification or reason for this. So thus, I'm reluctant to confide in others because of this fear of being able to not trust someone else, fear of information being used against you. And take a step back and imagine this person in a counseling setting. So if you have this underlying assumption that everyone is out to get you, no one can be trusted, and any information you share is going to be used against you, and then you have a counselor doing an intake session who's asking you all of these questions, that's going to be pretty intimidating. Therapy can be a really big struggle for these individuals, and it takes a long time to build trust and rapport. So they read everything as some sort of hidden, demeaning, or threatening thing. And that leads to them bearing grudges, perceiving attacks on themselves, and having recurrent suspicion, particularly looking at things like suspicions of infidelity in relationships. So like, I have no evidence that my spouse is cheating on me, but I'm firmly believing that they are. And we always want to rule out things like schizophrenia, psychotic disorders. We want to make sure these aren't delusions. This is in fact a personality issue. And these can be specifiers related to mood disorders like bipolar and depression. We also want to rule out things like post-traumatic stress disorder. So the next is schizoid personality disorder, patterns of detachment from social relationships. So there is a limited emotional range of expression, a lack of interest in connecting with others. Think about people who are very tactile, mechanically, computer-oriented. There's little interest in connecting with others emotionally, sexually, at all. And they're unable to take pleasure in activities because, again, it's a question of what makes something a disorder. This is when it is interfering with somebody's ability to function or causing distress. So they want to be able to do these things, and they just cannot take pleasure in most activities. They rarely experience strong emotions, and they cannot find any way to connect with others. So they don't desire or enjoy close relationships, being part of a family. And when it says they don't desire it, they can't get the motivation for it. They can't understand why it needs to happen. So they're most often alone and are not able to, again, take pleasure in things. They lack close friends, and they find indifference related to praise, criticism, and feedback from others. So these individuals are often described as cold, detached. These are the individuals where we talk about things like flat affect. And again, obviously, we're going to want to rule out a lot of things here. So making sure that this is not a symptom of schizophrenia. This is not having to do with expressions of depression or the depressive state of bipolar disorder. So we're so depressed we just can't get arousal or find pleasure in things. Because as you recall, diminished pleasure is also a symptom of depression. So we want to make sure that that's not the best cause and explanation before we go to something like a personality disorder. And of course, we want to rule out things like autism, because these types of symptoms are also really common with individuals with autism and intellectual disabilities. So the next is schizotypal personality disorder. This is acute discomfort or capacity for relationships and distortions or eccentricities of behavior. Again, these things are starting late adolescence to early adulthood. So there are some delusions potentially going on, odd beliefs or magical thinking going on. This is where we clinically use the term bizarre, inconsistent with the cultural norms to which they belong. Unusual perceptual experiences, including bodily illusions. So this might, for example, be an individual who feels like their arm or their leg is just not theirs. It shouldn't be attached. It doesn't belong to me. I don't like it. Obviously want to rule out things like body dysmorphic disorder here. Looking at odd thinking or speech, suspiciousness or paranoia, inappropriate or constricted or flat affect, behavior and appearance that is odd and eccentric, lacking connections with others, and excessive social anxiety. Again, wanting to rule out things like social anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, depression, autism, etc. So this is really just your person who's exceptionally clinically bizarre. So that takes us into cluster B, which is always really interesting. These are our personality disorders we tend to hear a lot about. So we have antisocial personality disorder. This disorder is often who we refer to as psychopaths or sociopaths. This is where we see a lot of our serial killers. So all of you Cold Case podcast fans, these are the individuals that we often hear about in those podcasts. And so here we see a pervasive pattern of disregard and violation of the rights of others. Again, we see this showing up in mid to late adolescence, indicated by 3 or more of the following. And these characteristics are pretty classic and pretty true to the antisocial personality disorder, have been pretty consistent over time. So failure to have any sort of regard for things like laws and regulations. So these individuals often break the rules without concern about consequences, are often in trouble with the law, and don't really worry about it too much. So they repeatedly do things that are grounds for them to get into legal trouble or arrested. We see a lot of deceitfulness, lying, use of false identities, and particularly taking advantage of others for personal profit or pleasure. So they're doing this because it's entertaining for them. And antisocial personality disorder, these individuals are often not capable of experiencing empathy. So the parts of their brain that experience empathy for others just are disconnected. They just do not function. We also see marked impulsivity. So there's no planning ahead. There's just doing whatever whenever you feel like it and not worrying about the consequences. We see a lot of irritability and aggression, repeated physical fights, assaulting others, again, lacking that empathy piece, reckless disregard for the safety of yourself or for others that connects to that idea of impulsiveness, and consistent irresponsibility. So they're not consistent in maintaining work, honoring financial obligations, they're not worried about debt, they're not worried about much of anything, and they lack remorse for anything that they've done in this process. So it's really individuals who are wired for seeking out things that activate the pleasure centers of the brain without any regard for consequences. So we do have conduct disorder, which is sort of the precursor to antisocial personality disorder for individuals under the age of 18. And if these things have been going on since 15 years of age and the individual is at least 18 years old, we would start looking at something like antisocial personality disorder. And again, ruling out things like schizophrenia or even the manic phase of bipolar disorder can look like this for periods of time, but it's not something that we would see consistently over the course of the lifespan. Next, we have borderline personality disorder. This is always a really interesting one to talk about also. This is more commonly diagnosed among women than men, and has become a little bit of an insult in the therapy world. So my client is borderline often means that a client is really difficult to deal with. And that's partially because this personality disorder has marked instability of emotional regulation. So there's instability of relationships, instability of self-image and self-worth, instability of emotion, and marked impulsivity going on from the time of early childhood and adulthood. So whereas antisocial personality disorder, that individual had no sense of empathy for others, the borderline personality disorder has to do with constantly being worried about what other people think about you. So in terms of borderline personality disorder, again, we see a strong trauma connection, a strong issues of attachment in early developmental periods. And because of that, there's a lot of effort to avoid real or imagined abandonment. There's a really great book about the experiences of borderline personality disorder called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me, which is really characteristic of that idea of, I think everyone's going to abandon me at any given time. And so there's a pattern of unstable but really intense interpersonal relationships. So the individual who maybe is married a bunch of times or has really intense relationships that don't last for very long. So there's a lot of extremes between idealization and devaluation. I absolutely love you. I hate you. I absolutely love you. I can't live without you. I hate you and never want to see you again. And it really vacillates. There's also with that this identity disturbance. So there's unstable self-image and sense of self. And we see a lot of tying of self-image into the perceptions of others. We see a lot of impulsivity. This could be unreasonable spending, this could be risky sex practices, this could be use of substances, but things that are really self-damaging. And that connects back to that idea of struggles with self-worth. We also see strong history of suicidal behavior, gestures, threats, things like cutting are very common with this disorder. And not able to really regulate mood. So there's a lot of instability, there's a lot of anxiety, irritability, a lot of depression, but it only lasts for a few hours and then it's on to the next. So when you hear jokes about people who change their mood with the weather or those kinds of things, you're really talking about borderline personality disorder. So chronically feeling empty and angry and just stressed about everything to do with connection with others. This is an incredibly difficult, pervasive, lifelong experience of instability. And things like dialectical behavioral therapy, EMDR, internal family systems therapy, anything that's attachment-based, emotion-focused therapy are really great in terms of treatment modalities with borderline. So next we have histrionic personality disorder. This is the constant need for attention seeking and really intense emotional experiences. These are the people that we would characterize as drama queens. So they're not comfortable when they are not the center of attention. They might use inappropriate, sexually seductive, or provocative behavior to get attention. And they're shifting rapidly between shallow emotions. So their emotions are really intense, but they're not very deep. So I'm really upset and sad, but I'm over it 5 minutes later. And so they might use their physical appearance to draw attention to themselves, or have really affected speech, or talk just for the sake of talking. Now, this is not the same as the narcissistic personality disorder. Histrionic really is about, I need everyone to love me. And so there's a lot of theatricality, a lot of dramatization in order to do that. And they're highly influenced by others because they want others to like them. And so they consider everyone to be their very best friend. Everyone's in love with them, even if that's not necessarily the case. So when you think about histrionic personality disorder, this is Michael from The Office. Michael Scott is a perfect example of histrionic personality disorder. So the last disorder in cluster B is narcissistic personality disorder. So this is about grandiosity and a need for admiration and that marked lack of empathy. So this is somewhere in between antisocial personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. So this individual has a grandiose sense of self-importance, and they expect this to be known and recognized by everyone around them. If it's not recognized, then it's a problem. And so they're preoccupied with these fantasies of success, power, brilliance, beauty, ideal love. This idea that I am going to be the most powerful, successful person in my industry. I am brilliant, I am attractive, and therefore everyone will love me. And so they believe that this individual is special and unique, and so they should only be around people who are also special and unique or have a lot of status, because really those are the only individuals who deserve to be around them anyway. So there's excessive need for admiration, a lot of entitlement, to the point where they're sometimes exploitive. They might take advantage of others to make themselves look good, or to meet their own needs, or to be able to achieve greater success. And they're not really able to recognize or identify the feelings of others in the process. And if someone is doing better than them, there's a lot of envy, and they believe everyone is jealous of them. Everyone loves them, everyone is jealous of me. So they're arrogant, haughty, narcissistic personality disorder. Perfect example is Regina George from Mean Girls. Everybody is jealous of me and I'm amazing. So then we have cluster C. So the first disorder in cluster C is avoidant personality disorder. This is a pervasive pattern of social inhibition, feeling of inadequacy, hypersensitivity to negative evaluations. And this begins in early adulthood, and we see the following symptomology with this disorder. Avoiding anything related to jobs or occupations, or interpersonal contact because of fear of criticism, disapproval, or rejection. Is unwilling to get involved with people unless they're certain that those individuals like them or will be nice to them. Shows restraint in intimate relationships because of fear of being shamed or ridiculed. Is preoccupied with the idea of being criticized or rejected in certain social situations. Is inhibited by new interpersonal situations because they feel inadequate. So going to a gathering with new friends, or going to an unstructured social activity where they don't know everybody is incredibly overwhelming for them. And so they see themselves as just a giant hunk of human garbage. They find themselves unappealing. They think of themselves as inferior to others, as socially inept. They just think that they're absolute trash. And so they're reluctant to take risks or engage in anything new because it might be embarrassing. It might result in them getting hurt. Now, we want to make sure that we're ruling out things like social anxiety. So making sure this really has to do with your sense of self, not just a fear of social situations. And there's a subtle difference there. Personality disorders are really about pervasive patterns of the way that you perceive and view yourself. So the next is dependent personality disorder. This is this excessive and pervasive need to be taken care of that leads to you being submissive or clingy. So this is where we talk about people being codependent. There's this fear of separation. I can't be without you. I need you all the time. And so this, again, starts in early adulthood. And we see this idea that you have difficulty making everyday decisions without advice or reassurance from other people. You need others to take responsibility for most areas of your life. You have difficulty expressing disagreement with others because you're afraid that they'll be mad at you, they won't approve of you, they won't love you, or take care of you anymore. Have trouble initiating projects or doing things on your own. You need that support. You need someone to do it for you and take care of you. And going to excessive lengths to seek out that support, that reassurance and nurturing from others that they are there for you, they love you, to the point of it being sometimes irritating to others, and volunteering to do things that are unpleasant or that you don't like to do for the sake of making sure that person doesn't leave you. And when you are unable to take care of yourself, you feel helpless and uncomfortable. So there's these exaggerating fears of helplessness. I'm not going to be able to do anything. And so as soon as a relationship ends, you're seeking out a new one because you have to have somebody. There's this unrealistic fear of not being able to take care of yourself. So again, we often refer to this as codependency, and this dependent personality disorder has a very dangerous combination with someone who has narcissistic personality disorder. So they might take a lot of advantage of the person with dependent personality disorder, and they exchange this need to be liked and praised with this need to be taken care of. So the last disorder in cluster C is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is in fact different from obsessive compulsive disorder. So there's a difference between something that's ritualistic and involving mood disorders and something that is personality based, because again, it's more geared towards the sense of self. So with OC personality disorder, OCPD, there's this pervasive preoccupation with order, perfectionism, and the sense of control. So needing to have control of everything around you, which then leaves you very inflexible, not open to new experiences, not open to new ways of efficiency. So this individual has 4 or more of the following symptoms: preoccupied with the idea of details, rules, list, order, organization, schedules. They need these things. And if they don't have these things, then the activity has no point. So this is the person who cannot play a board game without first reading all the rules before they start. And so there's this idea of the need for perfectionism and control, which is markedly different than obsessive compulsive disorder, which focuses a lot on anxiety and rituals or habits that alleviate that anxiety. This is our perfectionist. So they need to be so perfect that they're not able to complete a task because they haven't met their own strict standards. And so they're really devoted to work, productivity, and other things just don't matter. So the exclusion of leisure activities and friendships because of the need to be dedicated to work. And so they're inflexible about a lot of things. Their morality and ethics and values are very rigid. Things are against the rules or they are not against the rules. There is no gray area. So imagining someone with OCPD as a therapist would be really frustrating for them because there are so many things that are ambiguous in what we do, and there's no clear and correct answer most of the time. And so that would be unbearable for this individual. And so everything also has to be done by them. So they cannot delegate to other people. Things have to be done right, and they have to be done by this individual themselves because of that perfectionistic tendency. There's also this idea of not being able to discard worn out or worthless objects, even if they have no sentimental value. Now, this is not the same as hoarding disorder. This is just like, I can't get rid of things because I can't control what happens after I don't have them in my possession anymore. Or this is the individual who's very miserly or cheap. They don't like to spend money, so they need to keep all their money just in case something bad happens. Again, there's that compulsive piece. Like, I need to make sure I'm prepared for all occasions, so I have to keep everything. I have to save all my money. I can't spend it. So there's a lot of rigidity and a lot of stubbornness. And so this can be very frustrating and very debilitating for individuals.